On the warm, humid afternoon of July 12, 2014, the coastal city of St. Petersburg, Florida, bustled with its usual rhythm. The Gulf waters shimmered under the sunlight, and the streets carried the faint scent of salt mixed with the aroma of food from small cafes that lined Central Avenue. Within this picturesque setting, a seemingly ordinary love story had quietly taken root, a story that, for the people involved, would end in irreversible tragedy only days after it officially began. The man at the center of this story was Michael Harris, a 34-year-old construction supervisor known among his colleagues for his disciplined work ethic and quiet demeanor. Born and raised in Clearwater, Florida, Michael lived most of his life within a 30-mile radius of his childhood home. He had an uncomplicated lifestyle, preferring fishing trips and late-night barbecues with friends over crowded nightlife. By his own account, he had never been particularly lucky in love. His previous relationships had ended either due to conflicting priorities or what he described as a lack of honesty. In early March 2014, Michael's life took a different turn. While browsing an online dating platform that catered to international matches, he came across the profile of Alina Santoso, a 29-year-old originally from Yogyakarta, Indonesia. Her profile photograph showed a woman with a calm expression, a warm smile and long black hair that fell neatly over her shoulders. Her bio mentioned a love for photography, beach sunsets, and cooking traditional Indonesian dishes. The first messages between Michael and Alina were polite and cautious. He asked about her life in Indonesia, and she responded with stories of her hometown, her family, and her aspirations to live in the United States. Over the following weeks, the messages grew more personal. They began speaking over video calls every evening, with Michael often staying up late to match the 12-hour time difference. Alina's English was fluent, though accented, and Michael found her gentle voice reassuring after long days at work. By May 2014, Michael had flown to Indonesia to meet Alina in person. They spent 10 days together in Bali, staying at a small resort near Seminyak Beach. Michael later told a friend that the trip felt too perfect. The kind of connection that made him believe he had finally found the honesty he had been missing in past relationships. The couple spent their days exploring markets, visiting temples, and watching sunsets over the water. Michael returned to Florida convinced that he wanted to marry her. Alina's past was something she kept guarded. When questions about her childhood or early 20s arose, she redirected the conversation to lighter topics. Michael, infatuated and trusting, didn't press for details. What he didn't know was that years before, in 2008, Alina had undergone gender confirmation surgery in Bangkok, Thailand, after living for most of her life as a male named Adifir Santoso. This chapter of her life had been deliberately left out of her conversations with Michael, not because she didn't see it as part of who she was, but because she feared rejection. In June 2014, the couple began processing Alina's fiancé visa. By the time it was approved, they had planned a modest wedding at a small chapel in St. Petersburg. On July 7, 2014, under a clear sky and in front of a handful of close friends, Michael and Alina exchanged vows. The ceremony was simple. Michael wore a navy suit, and Alina wore a white sleeveless gown she had brought from Indonesia. They posed for photographs in front of the chapel's wooden doors, smiling as if the future promised nothing but happiness. For the first few days, married life seemed exactly as Michael had imagined. They moved into his single-story home in a quiet neighborhood, spending mornings drinking coffee on the porch and evenings watching TV together. Neighbors recalled seeing them walking hand in hand along the street, looking like any newlywed couple adjusting to their shared life. Yet, beneath this calm exterior, a silent tension lingered, a truth Alina had kept for years, folded away in sealed envelopes and hidden documents that had traveled with her from Indonesia. Among them was a manila folder containing her Thai hospital records, legal name change certificates, and old photographs from a life she had long since left behind. It was paperwork she hoped would never need to be discussed. But inside that folder was the key to a devastating chain of events that would unfold just 5 days later, turning what had begun as a summer romance into one of the most shocking domestic violence cases in the city's recent memory. The morning of July 8, 2014, the day after their wedding, began quietly in Michael Harris's home on 9th Avenue North, St. Petersburg. The summer heat had already settled in by 9 a.m., and the air conditioning hummed in the background as Michael prepared breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee. Alina joined him in the kitchen wearing a light blue robe, her hair still damp from the shower. They exchanged small talk about the plans for the day, unpacking the rest of her suitcases, setting up a joint bank account, and visiting Michael's sister later that week. Michael was a man who valued routine, and Alina seemed eager to fit into it. She offered to handle the laundry while he worked on rearranging the living room furniture to make space for her belongings. That first full day together as husband and wife passed without tension. In the evening, they sat on the porch with glasses of sweet tea, talking about the possibility of taking a short trip to Key West before summer ended. Over the next few days, Michael introduced Alina to more of his world. On July 9th, he took her to a local seafood restaurant, the Oyster Bar, where he was a regular customer. The waitress, an old acquaintance of Michael's, asked about the wedding and complimented Alina on her dress from the photographs Michael had shown her. Alina smiled politely, answering in soft, deliberate English. To Michael, she seemed slightly reserved in public, though warm and talkative in private. On July 10th, Michael returned to work for a half-day to check on a construction site he was overseeing. Alina stayed home, arranging her clothes in the bedroom closet and stacking her small collection of books on the shelf. She also spent time organizing her important documents in a drawer beside the bed. Inside a weathered manila folder, she kept her passport, birth certificate, visa paperwork, and medical records from Thailand. These papers had been with her through multiple moves and were always packed carefully at the bottom of her luggage. She slid the folder into the back of the drawer, behind a row of sweaters, thinking it was unlikely Michael would ever look there. By July 11th, the couple's social circle had begun to take notice of their marriage. Michael's longtime friend, Daniel Rhodes, stopped by in the afternoon to drop off a belated wedding gift, a framed photograph of a fishing trip the two men had taken years earlier. Alina served iced tea and joined their conversation for a few minutes before excusing herself to make a phone call to her family in Indonesia. Daniel later recalled that Michael seemed genuinely happy, speaking about future plans and how he wanted to take Alina to Disney World before the year's end. But in small ways, cracks were beginning to appear. That evening, while watching television, Michael casually asked Alina about her previous relationships. He wondered if she had ever been married before or if she had dated seriously in Indonesia. Alina gave vague answers, saying only that she had been focused on her work and personal growth before meeting him. Michael didn't press the issue, but the thought lingered in his mind. The morning of July 12th brought an unexpected shift. Michael woke earlier than usual, intending to mow the lawn before the midday heat. Alina was still asleep, and as he went to grab a pair of work gloves from the bedroom dresser, he noticed that one of the drawers was slightly open. He reached in, pushing sweaters aside, and his hand brushed against a stiff, oversized envelope. Without any particular reason at first, he pulled it out. The envelope was the manila folder Alina had hidden. Inside were neatly clipped documents. A hospital discharge paper from Payavate Hospital in Bangkok, dated August 2008, referencing gender reassignment surgery, a legal name change certificate from Yogyakarta District Court, and several passport-sized photographs of a younger person with short hair, the facial features unmistakably similar to Alina's but clearly male. Michael stood frozen for several moments, staring at the papers. He placed the documents back in the folder, slid it into the drawer, and went outside to mow the lawn without saying anything. Throughout the day, however, he was quieter than usual. Alina noticed but didn't comment. By the evening, his mood had shifted to forced cheerfulness. They had dinner together, grilled chicken with rice, and watched a movie. Alina believed the day had ended normally. But Michael's mind was already working through questions he had never imagined needing to ask. Who exactly had he married? Why hadn't she told him? And what did this mean for their future as a couple? Those questions would fester over the next 48 hours. For Alina, the marriage still felt new, full of opportunities to bond and build trust. For Michael, it had begun to feel like a house built on unstable ground. This quiet fracture in their relationship, invisible to neighbors and friends, was the first real tremor that would lead to the violent confrontation just days later. The morning of July 13, 2014, began like any other summer Sunday in St. Petersburg. By 7:30 a.m., the sun had already turned the sky a pale blue, and a thin layer of humidity clung to the air. Michael Harris sat at the kitchen table, nursing his first cup of coffee. Across from him, Alina sliced pieces of mango into a bowl, humming softly to herself. To anyone watching from the outside, They appeared to be a typical newlywed couple enjoying a quiet breakfast. But inside Michael's mind, the previous day's discovery had not loosened its grip. He had spent most of the night awake, replaying the images from the documents he had found. The medical records, the name change certificate, the photographs. Each time he closed his eyes, the papers appeared again as though they were demanding his attention. Around 10 a.m., after they had cleared the breakfast dishes, Michael asked Alina if she wanted to go to the Sunday market downtown. She agreed without hesitation, suggesting they leave in an hour. While she went to shower, Michael sat alone in the living room, staring at the muted television. His right foot tapped rapidly against the carpet, a sign of restless energy that he didn't notice himself. By the time they reached the market, the streets were crowded with tourists and locals browsing stalls of fresh produce, handmade jewelry, and local art. Michael walked beside Alina, holding her hand but speaking very little. He purchased a paper cup of iced lemonade and offered her a sip, trying to maintain the outward appearance of calm. But the weight of unasked questions made his voice flat and his smile brief. They returned home just after 2 p.m. Alina went to the bedroom to change clothes, and Michael followed her. As she placed her handbag on the dresser, he spoke abruptly. "Alina, I found something in your drawer yesterday," he said, his voice low but tight. She turned to look at him, her expression shifting from curiosity to unease. "What do you mean?" "The folder," he replied. "The papers from Thailand. The hospital record. The name change. And those pictures." For several seconds Alina said nothing. Her hands remained still on the dresser, her eyes locked on Michael's face. Finally she took a slow breath. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I just didn't know when. I didn't want to lose you before we even started our life together." Michael's jaw clenched. "You should have told me before we got married," he said. "You should have been honest from the start." Alina stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "I'm the same person you fell in love with. Nothing about how I feel for you has changed. My past is my past, and it doesn't erase who I am now." But Michael's focus was fixed on what he saw as a betrayal. "You lied to me," he said, raising his voice for the first time. "You let me stand up in front of my friends and family, say vows, and you never told me the truth." The tension in the room thickened. Alina's own voice rose, not in anger but in desperation. "I was scared. You don't understand what it's like to live with this kind of secret. People judge you, they walk away, they see you as nothing but what you used to be. I wanted you to see me for me, not for a piece of paper from years ago." Michael turned away, pacing near the bed. His mind was a tangle of shock, confusion, and a growing sense of humiliation. He imagined how his friends would react if they knew, how his family would speak about it behind closed doors. Each thought tightened the knot in his chest. They did not speak for the rest of the afternoon. Michael spent most of his time in the garage, tinkering with tools but accomplishing nothing. Alina stayed inside, watching television with the volume low. The silence between them was heavy, each of them aware that the conversation was far from over. The following morning, July 14th, the situation reached a breaking point. At 8:15 a.m., Michael came into the kitchen where Alina was pouring coffee. Without sitting down, he said, "We need to talk again." She set the pot down carefully. "All right," she replied, her voice cautious. Michael stood by the counter, his arms crossed. "I can't stop thinking about what I found. I feel like I've been living in someone else's story, not mine. You kept something huge from me, and I don't know if I can trust you now." Alina's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, Michael. I should have told you sooner. But I need you to see that I'm not trying to hurt you. I've spent years becoming the person I am. That surgery, those papers, they're part of my history, but they don't change the fact that I love you." Michael's breathing grew heavier. "It changes everything for me," he said. "You should have given me the choice to decide if I could live with it." Alina's own frustration began to surface. "So what now? Are you going to leave me because of something I can't change? After everything we've shared?" The argument escalated. Voices rose, words sharpened. Michael accused her of building their marriage on a lie. Alina accused him of refusing to see her as more than her past. At one point, Michael slammed his hand on the counter, startling her. By mid-morning, the fight had become physical. Neighbors later reported hearing loud thuds from inside the house, followed by shouting. Exactly what happened in those minutes would later be pieced together by investigators, but what was certain was that it marked the first instance of violence in their marriage, an irreversible step toward the tragedy that would occur later that same day. By the afternoon of July 14, 2014, the quiet residential street of 9th Avenue North, St. Petersburg was disrupted by the sudden wail of sirens. At 2:37 p.m., the first patrol unit from the St. Petersburg Police Department arrived in front of Michael Harris's single-story home. Two neighbors, a middle-aged couple who lived directly across the street, had placed the 911 calls after hearing prolonged shouting, loud banging, and then an alarming silence that lasted several minutes. When Officer Daniel McCarthy stepped out of his squad car, the midday heat hit him like a wave. He approached the front porch, noting that the door was ajar. From inside there was no sound, no voices, no movement, only the low hum of the air conditioning unit. He knocked twice on the doorframe and called out, "St. Petersburg Police." Receiving no response, McCarthy pushed the door fully open. The scene inside was tense and disordered. A coffee mug lay shattered on the kitchen floor, the liquid forming a small brown pool near the base of a cabinet. A dining chair was tipped over and several items, a salt shaker, a picture frame, were scattered across the tile. Just beyond the kitchen in the living room, Michael Harris sat on the couch, his hands resting on his knees. His face was pale, his t-shirt damp with sweat. Across from him, lying motionless on the floor, was Alina Santoso. Her head was turned to one side, eyes half open, with a visible bruise forming along her jawline. A faint trace of blood marked the corner of her lip. McCarthy immediately radioed for paramedics and backup, his voice steady but urgent. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I've got an unresponsive female, possible domestic. Need EMS here now." Michael did not attempt to flee or resist. When McCarthy instructed him to stand and step aside, he complied without a word, moving slowly toward the far wall. The officer noted that Michael's hands were reddened, one knuckle showing signs of fresh abrasion. At 2:43 p.m., the first ambulance arrived. Paramedics quickly assessed Alina, checking her pulse and airway. After several tense moments, one of them looked up and shook his head. Time of death was pronounced at 2:46 p.m. Detective Laura Vega, a 15-year veteran of the department's homicide unit, was called to the scene. She arrived at 3:12 p.m., wearing plain clothes but with her badge clipped to her belt. Vega began by surveying the home, carefully noting the signs of struggle. The displaced furniture, the broken mug, and the red mark on the wall near the kitchen doorway that could have been caused by an impact. She approached Michael, who was now seated at the dining table under the watch of another officer. His expression was vacant, and he stared down at the tabletop as if it held answers. When Vega introduced herself, he gave a slow nod but said nothing until she asked what had happened. "We argued," he said finally, his voice low. I found something about her. Something she didn't tell me before we got married." When Vega asked him to elaborate, he hesitated before replying, She used to be a man. She never told me. I found the papers. The surgery, the name change, all of it." Vega kept her tone even. "And then? I confronted her," Michael said. "We yelled. She got close to me trying to make me listen. I pushed her. She fell. I don't know if she hit her head or what, but then she wasn't moving." Vega made a note but didn't respond to his explanation. She had learned long ago that the first version of events rarely matched the physical evidence. Crime scene technicians arrived shortly after, photographing the interior of the home from multiple angles. They collected the broken mug pieces, swabbed the reddish smear on the wall, and bagged a blue robe from the bedroom floor that appeared to have blood on the collar. In the master bedroom, one technician discovered the manila folder tucked into a dresser drawer, partially concealed under clothing. Vega flipped through the contents: the hospital discharge summary from Bangkok, the Yogyakarta court document, and the photographs of a younger Adifir Santoso. She set the folder on the kitchen counter, mentally noting its relevance to Michael's stated motive. At 4:05 p.m., Michael was formally taken into custody on suspicion of second-degree murder. As he was escorted to the patrol car, several neighbors stood on their porches, watching in silence. Word of the arrest traveled quickly through the block, carried by whispered conversations and exchanged glances. Meanwhile, Alina's body was transported to the Pinellas County Medical Examiner's office. The preliminary report would later note evidence of blunt force trauma to the head and neck, along with defensive bruising on her forearms, injuries inconsistent with a single push. By 6 p.m., Detective Vega sat in her office reviewing the initial evidence log. The pieces were troubling. Michael's claim of a push versus the pattern of Alina's injuries, the motive rooted in undisclosed personal history, and the timeline provided by neighbors who insisted they heard multiple impacts before the silence. Still, the case was only in its earliest phase. Vega knew that to move forward, she would need witness statements, a full autopsy report, and any background information on the couple's short marriage. She made a list of people to interview. Daniel Rhodes, the friend who visited days earlier, the neighbors who called 911, and anyone who might have known Alina before she came to Florida. Unbeknownst to Vega, the folder in the bedroom would become the centerpiece of a more complicated narrative than it first appeared. One that would challenge initial assumptions and reveal that the events leading to Alina's death were not as straightforward as they seemed. On the morning of July 15, 2014, less than 24 hours after Michael Harris's arrest, Detective Laura Vega arrived at the Pinellas County Medical Examiner's office to review the preliminary autopsy findings. The air outside was already heavy with Florida heat, but inside the sterile, fluorescent-lit office, the temperature was kept low, the silence broken only by the distant hum of ventilation fans. Dr. Erin Mulrooney, the medical examiner assigned to the case, greeted Vega with a neutral expression. She handed over the initial report without commentary. Vega scanned the first few lines. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with multiple impacts. Secondary injuries include defensive bruising on forearms and contusions along the upper arms, suggesting physical restraint. Vega looked up. Multiple impacts? Michael said he pushed her once. Mulrooney nodded slightly. The injuries aren't consistent with a single fall. The pattern suggests at least 3 separate impacts, possibly from punches, or her head hitting a hard surface more than once. Vega made a note. Anything else? Yes, Mulrooney said. Toxicology shows traces of a sedative in her bloodstream. Not enough to be lethal, but enough to cause drowsiness or disorientation if taken within the last few hours before death. That detail stopped Vega cold. Sedative? As in, sleeping pills? Possibly. Diazepam or something similar. We'll have confirmation in the full report, Mulrooney replied. It was an unexpected layer. If Alina had been drugged before the confrontation, it could change the entire dynamic of what happened, and possibly suggest premeditation. By 10:45 a.m., Vega was back at headquarters, pulling up Michael's financial records. She found 2 recent purchases at a local pharmacy on July 11th and July 13th, each for small amounts and each paid in cash. The receipts didn't list specific items, but Vega knew the pharmacy had a policy of keeping purchase logs for controlled substances. She drove to Bayview Pharmacy on 4th Street, where the manager confirmed that Michael had indeed purchased over-the-counter medication on the first date, and on the second date, the day before Alina's death, he had picked up a prescription refill for diazepam. The prescription wasn't in Michael's name. It belonged to his older brother, who had suffered from anxiety but had not lived in Florida for over a year. The manager remembered Michael explaining that he was picking it up on his brother's behalf. That detail immediately raised suspicion. Vega called in the pharmacy's CCTV footage and had the prescription bottle entered into the evidence log. Meanwhile, interviews with neighbors were underway. One key witness, Helen Porter, who lived next door, told officers she had seen Alina outside around 10 a.m. on the morning of her death. She looked slow, Porter said, like she was tired or dizzy. I asked if she was okay and she smiled, said she was just having a lazy day. Helen also claimed she heard the argument escalate between 10:30 and 11 a.m. She could make out fragments of shouting, Michael's voice louder than Alina's. Then came the sounds, a heavy thud, a pause, another thud, and what she described as a crash like furniture hitting the wall. After that, she heard nothing for nearly an hour before the arrival of the police. By the afternoon of July 15th, Vega had begun to doubt the clean, linear version of events Michael had given her. She returned to the manila folder found in the bedroom. While it clearly explained the motive Michael had cited, Vega started to wonder if the folder's discovery had been truly accidental. She brought Michael back into an interview room at the Pinellas County Jail. The room was small and bare, the air slightly stale. Michael sat with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the table. Michael, Vega began, we've reviewed the autopsy. Alina had multiple injuries, not just one from falling. She also had sedatives in her system. Can you explain that? Michael frowned. Sedatives? I don't know anything about that. Then why did you pick up your brother's diazepam prescription the day before she died? Vega pressed. His jaw tightened. I told the pharmacy I was picking it up for my brother. That's the truth. I didn't give any to her. Vega leaned forward. Your neighbor saw her looking disoriented that morning. She also heard multiple impacts. This isn't lining up with what you told us. Michael's voice rose slightly. I didn't mean to hurt her. I was angry, but I didn't drug her. She kept trying to talk to make me understand, and I lost control for a second. That's it. But Vega wasn't convinced. The combination of sedative traces, the physical evidence, and the suspicious timing of the prescription pickup suggested there was more to the story, possibly a premeditated act disguised as a heat-of-the-moment fight. Later that evening, another piece of information shifted the case again. Daniel Rhodes, Michael's longtime friend, returned Vega's earlier call and agreed to meet at the station. He seemed uneasy as he sat down. There's something I didn't say before, Daniel admitted. 2 days before the wedding, Michael told me he thought Alina was hiding something big. He didn't say what, but he joked, or maybe half-joked, that if it was bad enough, he'd end the whole thing before it even started. I didn't think much of it at the time. No, I'm not so sure. That comment placed Michael's potential motive days before the supposed accidental discovery of the folder. If true, it could mean he had been looking for confirmation, or a reason, to act. Vega closed her notebook. The case had transformed in less than 48 hours, from a spontaneous domestic violence incident to something that smelled of planning, calculation, and a trigger that may have been anticipated rather than accidental. And yet, one thing still bothered her. If Michael had planned this, why keep the manila folder in the house at all? Unless someone else had put it there. That question would soon open a much deeper, more tangled layer of the case, one that would force Vega to reconsider not just Michael's guilt, but whether Alina's past had been brought into the open by another hand entirely. The days following Detective Harper's unsettling interview with the neighbors marked a turning point in the investigation. It was now abundantly clear that the relationship between Michael and Lillian had not been the harmonious newlywed life the photographs suggested. Harper spent hours meticulously going over the case files, audio recordings, and autopsy reports. Each detail painted a picture of rising tension and concealed truths. On April 20th, just 5 days into the marriage, witnesses recalled a heated argument emanating from the couple's living room. The fight reportedly lasted over an hour. Several neighbors later admitted to hearing Lillian's voice raised in anger, with Michael's deeper tone punctuated by moments of sharp retorts. These were not the typical quarrels of newlyweds adjusting to married life. The words they exchanged, as pieced together from multiple statements, hinted at accusations, betrayal, and something Michael felt had been hidden from him. That evening, according to phone records, Michael had attempted to call his longtime friend, Daniel Brooks, 3 times in a span of 15 minutes. Daniel later told detectives that Michael sounded shaken and confused during their brief conversation. Michael had allegedly said, "There's something I didn't know, something huge. I don't know what to do, man." Before Daniel could ask for details, the call had abruptly ended. Harper noted this as a crucial point in the timeline. The catalyst for the rising conflict, as the investigation revealed, appeared to be the discovery of a small, weathered manila folder that had been tucked away in the bottom drawer of Lillian's private desk. The folder contained a series of medical documents, including a certificate from a gender reassignment surgery performed in Thailand in 2016, accompanied by before and after medical photos. Forensic tests later confirmed Michael's fingerprints on the folder, suggesting he had opened it within hours before the final confrontation. According to statements from Lillian's colleague Andrea Kim, Lillian had been extremely private about her past. While Andrea described her as confident and strong, she also recalled moments when Lillian appeared fearful of being judged. Andrea told detectives, "She always worried someone would use her past against her. I think she wanted to tell Michael herself, maybe she just never found the right moment." For Michael, the revelation seemed to have struck at the core of his trust in the marriage. Friends who had spoken with him during the engagement period said he often described Lillian as the most honest person he had ever met. Discovering such a significant part of her history after the wedding might have triggered feelings of deception. On April 21st, the couple was seen together in public for the last time. Security footage from a local cafe showed them sitting opposite each other, their body language tense. Lillian's hands were clasped tightly on the table, her gaze fixed downward. Michael leaned forward, speaking in short, sharp bursts, occasionally gesturing with his hands. A cafe employee later told police, "It was like watching two people in a storm. You could tell something big had happened." That night, Harper theorized, the argument reignited at home. Forensic analysis found shattered glass near the kitchen area, indicating a possible physical struggle. The placement of overturned furniture suggested that the conflict had moved from one room to another. There were bruising patterns on both parties. Michael had older bruises on his forearms, while Lillian bore fresh defensive marks. The medical examiner's report later revealed that Michael had sustained multiple blunt force trauma injuries to the head. The pattern suggested repeated strikes with a heavy household object, possibly the cast iron pan found near the kitchen counter. Blood spatter analysis confirmed that the assault occurred near the sink, where droplets had been found on the tiled backsplash. By the time paramedics arrived, Lillian had fled the scene. Her car was found 2 miles away, abandoned near a wooded area with traces of blood on the steering wheel and driver's seat. It was here that the urgency of the investigation intensified. Harper knew that if Lillian remained at large, the possibility of her leaving the state, or even the country, was real. The rising conflict was no longer confined to the walls of the crime scene. It extended into a manhunt that would grip the local community and dominate headlines. The story was no longer just about a marriage gone wrong. It had become a pursuit of truth and justice, complicated by layers of secrecy, identity, and betrayal. And as Harper prepared his team for what would come next, he knew that every decision, every move, and every word in the coming days would determine whether Lillian was brought back alive, and whether the full truth of April 21st would ever be known. The trial began in early March 2017 at the Broward County Courthouse, with the courtroom packed with reporters, local residents, and both families sitting on opposite sides. The prosecution presented a detailed reconstruction of the events, backed by forensic reports, digital evidence from cell phones, and the testimony of the neighbor who had called 911. They emphasized that the attack had been deliberate, triggered by Daniel's discovery of the medical documents, and that his actions had been fueled by anger and a sense of betrayal. Daniel's defense team argued that he had acted in a sudden emotional outburst, pointing to his clean criminal record and the lack of premeditation. They tried to convince the jury that this was not a cold-blooded murder, but a tragic domestic incident that spiraled out of control. Still, the prosecution reminded the court that 5 days had passed between the wedding and the killing, and that Daniel had the opportunity to process his emotions, seek help, or even walk away from the marriage. Maria's family testified about her life before meeting Daniel, the difficulties she had faced as a transgender woman, and how she had worked hard to build a life where she could live openly and honestly. They described her as someone who believed in love, even after facing rejection in the past, and how her dream had been to marry and build a family. Her sister's voice trembled as she told the jury, "Maria didn't deserve to die because she was honest about who she was. She was my sister, my best friend." On March 15, 2017, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury found Daniel guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 38 years in prison, a decision met with quiet sobs from Maria's side of the courtroom and silence from Daniel's. As the sentence was read, Daniel stared at the floor, his hands clenched, showing no visible reaction. The case sparked conversations across Florida and beyond about domestic violence, prejudice, and the challenges transgender individuals face in relationships. Advocacy groups used Maria's story to push for better education about gender identity and for resources to protect vulnerable members of the LGBTQ+ community. In the months following the verdict, Maria's friends and family organized memorial events in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. They launched a scholarship in her name for young transgender students, hoping to turn their grief into something meaningful. While justice had been served in the eyes of the court, those who knew Maria understood that no sentence could undo the loss. Her story remained a reminder of how quickly love could turn into tragedy when trust was shattered and prejudice mixed with rage. The apartment where the crime took place remained vacant for months, its windows covered, as if the building itself wanted to forget what had happened inside on that quiet January night in 2017.